everyone, good day. I am Jover Pantao and you are watching Learning Assessment with Sir J. Today, we're going to talk about the purposes of assessment. And our objective is to distinguish the three main purposes of assessment. Assessment has three main purposes: assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning. These purposes are interrelated as they are all endeavored to gather information about the learning of the students. In order to yield the most effective assessment in learning, understanding of these purposes can make teachers employ assessment strategies that are fit to the learning process. First, let's talk about assessment for learning. Assessment for learning can be diagnostic or formative assessment which occurs throughout the learning sequence. It occurs when the teachers implement strategies to determine the learning needs of the students or to monitor the learning progress of the students to inform their teaching. Assessment strategies under this purpose create a culture in the classroom that promotes non-threatening the environment because students are not judged about their performance. It also encourages participation and interaction among the students, and the teachers are required to use different assessment tools. Generally, the strategies under this purpose of assessment are there to help the students figure out what they have learned so far and what else they need to work on in order to achieve the learning outcomes. Assessment for learning includes pre-tests, concept mapping, quizzes, cooperative learning activities, and many others. Under this purpose of assessment, the role of the teacher is centered on planning and designing teaching learning activities because assessment for learning appears throughout the teaching learning process. Usually, the teacher communicates the learning outcomes and standards to the students prior to the implementation of assessment activities. Aside from that, teachers are also there to determine the prior knowledge, perceptions, and misconceptions of the students for them to think about strategies adaptive to the learning needs of the students. They also provide ongoing and immediate feedback about the performances demonstrated by them. Aside from that, scaffolding skill is a requirement for teachers in assessment for learning because they need to focus on determining the learning styles and needs of the students. They need to activate this skill while assessing for learning because they need to move the learning forward in the zone of proximal development. They can remind, give hints, and encourage their students to accomplish the task. And that is assessment for learning. Let's move on to the second main purpose of assessment, and that is assessment as learning. Assessment as learning focuses on the activities that provides opportunity for the students to monitor their progress in learning. It is a formative assessment that empowers the students to reflect and monitor their progress based on their learning goals. Here, the students take responsibility to think about their personal habits and adjust to achieve their learning goals. Ipsative assessment, self-assessment, and peer assessment are among the examples of assessment as learning establishes students' roles and responsibilities in relation to their learning. It engages students in self and peer assessment and promotes students' confidence and self-esteem through an understanding of how they learn. Its focus on student reflection on their learning is powerful in building metacognition and an ability to plan for their own future learning goals. Because learners are self-directed under this purpose, these strategies promote lifelong learning skills. Assessment, and that is assessment of learning. Assessment of learning is summative by nature. It occurs when the teachers decide to use the evidence-based information about students' learning for them to come up with judgments on the achievement of the students against the standards. It desires to determine what students can demonstrate against the standard set. Usually, it takes place at the end of a unit, program, semester, or a year of study. Unit tests, culminating projects, or culminating performances are typical examples of assessment of learning. Assessment of learning describes the learning achievement of the students. It is used for evaluation and grading as well as reporting purposes. It provides ground for making decisions on the placement and promotion of students. Evaluative feedback about students' learning, which are communicated to the students, parents, and other stakeholders, are based on this assessment. So generally, the three main purposes of assessment are interrelated. Both the assessment for learning and assessment as learning are formative, while assessment of learning is summative. The assessment for and assessment as happen while the students are still on the process of learning the lesson, while the assessment of learning happens at the end of the learning process. So don't forget, there are three main purposes of assessment. First is assessment for learning, which is either diagnostic or formative. The second is assessment as learning, which is formative by nature. And finally, the third is assessment of learning, which is summative. Thank you for learning with me. This is Sir Jover, and you are watching Learning Assessment with Sir Jay. Bye everyone! See you in the next lesson that we're going to have about assessment. Maraming salamat!